Hey, it is your weekly corner Späti. It is Rob here, alone among the hosts, but joined by a returning guest and our friend Flo. Flo, what's up?
Hey y'all, what's up?
You may have guessed that we are talking about France again, specifically the upcoming June elections. We had an episode originally planned for right after the elections, a kind of reaction to the I don't know, the same old from Macron, the repeat of 2017. But now maybe this has been clearer to those on the ground in France. But now, even just a couple weeks later, there seems to be an exciting new development with this new left bloc and the upcoming June elections. So, Flo, I guess we should just start there. What is NUPES and what's going on with the June elections?
All right, so after the second round, Macron won, of course, with around 60%. So NUPES is the New People's Ecologic and Social Union. It's a coalition of parties, including La France Insoumise, the French Communist Party, the Socialists, and the Greens, as well as some other smaller constituent parties. So it's a legislative front against Macron and his government. So what it aims to do is basically create the strongest opposition possible and win as many seats as we can in the June 12th and June 19th two-round legislative elections.
That all sounds well and good, and I think it's something that people in every country call for. And of course, the left, their divisions on the left, the liberal left is very skeptical of the far left, and so on. And so these things don't usually happen. And in France, unless I'm mistaken, I believe people like Anne Hidalgo were calling Mélenchon a Russian agent a month ago? A month and a half ago? So it seems like a lot has changed in just a couple weeks. So what is the form of this new agreement, and how did it come together so quickly?
Yeah, for sure. So a lot of people could ask, why wasn't there an electoral alliance beforehand? Well, the reason was because a lot of parties like the Greens and the Socialists, they were offered, open hands, open arms, I would say, by La France Insoumise in the 2022 presidential election. So they missed a lot of opportunities where we gave them, favorable accords for the regional elections in 2021, and said, if we can maybe continue building bridges, we can, be together for 2022. But unfortunately, that didn't happen, right? So I would say La France Insoumise, with the best program, with the best candidate, it garnered 22% of the vote, putting it in a really hegemonic position on the left. So we went into negotiations with the Greens and the Communists at first in late April, and those negotiations terminated in early May, right? We finally agreed to talk with the Socialist Party, which was the most social liberal and most, I would say, historically treacherous party on the left. But it was all on our own terms. So I would say, we got a lot of what we wanted. We had all of our views on top of the agenda for every major domestic issue, including spiny issues of, the EU treaties, of whether or not we should submit to EU austerity or neoliberal treaties that constrain what we can do on the domestic level. So the Greens and the PS feel very attached to the EU. They're kind of more pro EU and EU optimists. And the PCF, for example, the Communist Party, the French Communist Party, is pro nuclear. So we actually were able to push forward our agenda on domestic issues, including energy, including EU treaties, including our social programs for social safety nets and raising the minimum wage, blocking energy prices, etc. So we have a lot of things that we got out of these negotiations, but we can maybe go into some nuances later, I guess.
Yeah, I would like to ask you some specific platform or some of the positions that this bloc is running on. But I think one of the best pieces of evidence to the I think boldness and just that it's a good platform is the criticism that is received from the neoliberal wing of the Socialist Party. It certainly seems to have the right enemies. I have a quote from Hollande himself here. Well, now I'm quoting France 24. The former French president had already warned that an accord between the Socialist Party and La France Insoumise would call into question the very principles that are the foundations of socialist engagement, telling France Info Radio on April 28th that such an alliance would lead to the disappearance of the Socialist Party, which is just, I don't know if he's looked out the window in the past 5 years, but it seems like making the right enemies. I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And for Hollande, a lot of people don't really care what he has to say now, since he left office with a 4% approval rating. So he's one of the old elephants, the old barons of the PS, that really want to keep their power as like a local apparatchik, right? And I would be, to be honest, I would be kind of happy if the PS would disappear, right? I know that we're in coalition with them, and you know, but I guess the fact that they accepted a lot of our program is proof that we're on top of this. We're on top of this relationship, and we got 22%. They only got 1.7% with Anne Hidalgo, and even Anne Hidalgo is she didn't want to be in the New PES alliance from the beginning. So it's like, I think now the decision has been made by their general secretary Olivier Faure, and so and their national council, which took a democratic internal vote. So it's like, this is this is a decision that has been made, and I'm glad that if it is the death of the Socialist Party, well, I mean, it's already been dead for a long time, since 2017, I would say, but tant mieux, as we say in French. It's like, all the better. I think it's good that they kind of leave place for the future of the left, which is in the more radical side of our coalition.
Let's get to some of those platform planks, I guess you'd say, in the in NUPES. So you have some listed here that from the Future and Common platform. Could you share some of those?
Okay. To be honest, we won't be able to achieve a lot of things on the on the foreign policy side of things, since the presidency accommodates the role of commander in chief. So when it comes to like La France Afrique, when it comes to our foreign policy and our relations with countries that we export arms to, like Saudi Arabia, India, etc., we won't be able to do very much on in case of a military conflict, or changing the Atlantis framework of the foreign policy establishment here in France. But there's significant advances that can be made by a left-wing majority in the National Assembly, including raising the minimum wage to 1,500 euros a month, lowering the retirement age to 60, with the minimum wage as the stipend for monthly pensions, and blocking the prices of energy, gasoline, and even fried fruits and vegetables. So like, there's like really concrete things that we can do if we have a legislative majority that will just impact millions of people that are in need of like food aid. We still have like 8 million people that need like literal food aid in France, that are in a situation where they have to go to local associations and get help paying for groceries and stuff. And so if we do this, we immediately alleviate poverty for like millions of citizens. We can also do stuff on the ecological and feminist side of things. So we can ban glyphosate, so like a toxic chemical used by Monsanto. And so we can achieve like concrete things that will prove that the ecological and feminist and socialist left still exist. Another thing that we have in our platform is like 1 billion euros will be budgeted to associations fighting femicide and sexual violence. So, in the past 3 years, we've had about like 18% increases in sexual violence and violence against women. So, I think that if we like budget 1 billion euros, that's a lot more than like what Macron has been doing. Just completely ignoring questions of feminism, ecology, and social rights and union rights all over the 5 years that he's been in office.
I want to talk about the polling really quick, because this all again sounds well and good, but the most surprising thing to me, again as an outsider coming in, is that this bloc is actually leading in the polls. not an outright majority, but is the ahead of Macron and the far right bloc. So uh, there's no easy way to answer this, but just is it as simple as, is there something else going on? Is it just that everyone has now come together against Macron? What is, why, other than the rightness of the policies, what has changed basically? Why is it ahead in the polls, and do you think that lead will hold?
Yeah, so there was a poll published by Harris Interactive just yesterday, actually, that said that the NUPES coalition is at 29% of voting intentions for June, and then below it we have like the rest of the forces of the right and the far right. So Ensemble, which represents the centrist coalition of Macron and two other centrist parties, they represent 26%, and then the far right, the National Rally, represents 23%. So with 29%, we have a comfortable lead, but it also proves that there's like three blocks of voters in society, right? In French, for the French legislative elections, we have the left, we have the right with Macron, and then we have the far right. And then you also have this fourth block, which is abstentionists, people who just don't vote or are tired of the same old in politics, and they just want to find a real alternative. So we need to prove to those voters, to those abstentionists, that we actually can like win back their trust, and that we are able and capable of governing, of governing the country. So I would say like we're actually better positioned than we were for the presidential elections in 2022 or even 2017, right? Like we have a comfortable, 3-point lead right now, a month before this election. There, there are a lot of scandals plaguing Ensemble, the centrist coalition, and obviously the far right always underperforms, even when months of polling show them at very high percentages. So like basically we always overperform, and we saw that last time with Mélenchon being at like 17%, and then the day of the election on April 10th he got like 22%, right? So the polling is already good. And the reason why is because about 80% of voters on the left said that they would be favorable to a coalition of all the left-wing parties, including the Greens, the Communists, the Socialists, and La France Insoumise, right? So we basically achieved the dream that a lot of voters that are outside of each party had always wanted, right? I would say like, okay, at least it's under the platform of La France Insoumise, because I would not want to accept like the Green platform or the Socialist platform or the Communist platform, because I personally, volunteer activist for La France Insoumise. I would want to, be anti-nuclear, which is not in the Communist platform, or I want to be like resistant to EU austerity, which is not in the Green or the Socialist platform. So now they just gave that up, and they are accepting our domestic policies. So that's the benefit of this coalition, and it also looks good in the eyes of voters who are not really engaged in any movement, right? Who have no real preference; they just vote for the left, and it looks good when everyone's together. It gives some enthusiasm, some optimism, and people don't fight each other because of factional reasons. Yeah.
One other positive to come out of it, in addition to all of the blocking Macron's neoliberal agenda, the absolute like ravaging of the country of France, implementing all these policies, it would be extremely satisfying to see Mélenchon as a prime minister under Macron. So I need you to brace me. Is there a way that Macron can get around it? How, let's say NUPES gets the plurality of votes but not a majority. Will we see a Prime Minister Mélenchon? What are the roadblocks?
All right. It's honestly very, very difficult. It is technically possible. It is technically possible for Mélenchon to become prime minister if we get 50% of the seats in the National Assembly. So there's like 577 seats in the National Assembly, and to get an outright majority, I think it's like you need 289 seats, and we have about 100 where it's basically winnable for the NUPES. we have 100 constituencies where it's winnable outright in the first round, and then we have uh, a bunch. We have like 400, around 400, where it's going to be a contest between us or the far right or the centrists for the second round. So it's um, it's technically possible because like we have 100 secure seats, we have 400 that are technically winnable, right? And you only need around 300 to have a majority. So Mélenchon would, if we had 50%, be the natural leader of whatever comes next in the National Assembly. So um, the way this works is that you have the French presidential elections, and then like about 2 months after, you have the legislative elections, which designate all the seats, and then the president must choose a prime minister. The National Assembly validates the choice of prime minister by the president. So right now we have a new prime minister who was chosen just like 2 days ago, Elisabeth Borne, and she is the former Ministry of Work minister, and she will remain prime minister unless we elect a sufficient opposition, right, in parliament, because the president then becomes forced to choose from the opposition's choice, right? The opposition can say like, we'll just block whoever you choose as prime minister unless it's our guy or our woman, right? And so in this case, it's been agreed upon that Mélenchon would be the choice of the opposition for prime minister.
I want to clarify or offer some useful context, which is that the system as it's designed now, if I'm not mistaken, Macron's party has a majority, like a solid majority, or at least a majority of the seats currently. And so that's basically by design. The legislative elections are immediately after the presidential elections. A lot of the kind of, I don't know how commonly referred these how commonly these arrangements are referred to in day-to-day political life, but at least online you see some references like in the late 90s, the plural left was blocked Chirac in a kind of cohabitation, which I guess would be the direct precedent of this. And of course, there's as far as I understand, a certain national pride in something like the Popular Front from much earlier. But how do you see something like this cohabitation, where again, in the ideal scenario where NUPES has a plurality or a significant block of seats, how would that look with Macron as president, even if it's not getting the prime minister? What are the levers that a left bloc could pull? What are the I'm trying to think of more metaphors here. What are the tacks that can be thrown in front of Macron's tanks? Let's put it that way.
Yeah, for sure. So even without a legislative majority, we could still enact, uh, laws and referendums if enough opposition is built in parliament and on spiny issues that can even divide the centrists, or um, like we could be able to propose referendums and initiate certain procedures in parliament that would put blocks into whatever like reforms on the retirement age, for example, that Macron wants to do, which is really unpopular. And we already had like major protests in 2019, right before COVID hit, against the reform of retirement and pensions. So you mentioned that there was the different eras of cohabitation. So in the 80s and 90s, we had a couple examples of cohabitation. For example, under Mitterrand, he was the first socialist president of the Fifth Republic. Um, he lost his majority in the National Assembly in the '86 elections. So he chose this right wing guy, Jacques Chirac, who eventually became president, who was on the right wing of the Rally for the Republic Party, the Gaullists. And so it was to gain trust of people so that he could eventually win the '88 presidential election. So there was like an alternative where he could have chosen someone that's more centrist and social liberal, but he actually just like, I don't know, just betrayed that to gain more capital, social capital, so that he could like win that future election. It was just like, it's always a delicate position, and it's always better to have the presidency and to just like choose all of your ministers and to win every legislative election. Of course, like, it's difficult because we lost by very few, points. We lost our chance to get to the second round and maybe even to get to the presidency with Mélenchon. But there's an example of how cohabitation was relatively better than the alternative. In 1997 to 2002, you had Jacques Chirac, who was president, right? Right-wing guy, and then he had to name an opposition prime minister. So this was Lionel Jospin, a cadre from the Socialist Party. Kind of technocratic guy, not very charismatic, but at least he made some labor reforms. One that was extremely essential, the 35-hour work week, which made it really difficult for employers to put more hours on workers, so that it actually theoretically increases employment, so that we have a maximum amount of employment, and that unions can actually become stronger in this way, and workers have more negotiating power, and etc. So you basically had the most amount of power distributed to the hands of workers in a long time by the prime minister being in power with a legislative majority in the late 90s, early 2000s, right? So getting the post of prime minister would be essential to making reforms for the left on domestic policy, right? Of course, like, it'll be difficult to stop neocolonialism in Africa, or in the case that NATO calls on all of its member states to go to war, like, the president has to take that role of chief of command. But on domestic policy, we'll be able to get things done if we have Mélenchon as prime minister, right? So that's the bet that we're making. Of course, it's difficult. It's going to be like really hard, because especially we don't have like proportional elections. We just have like circumscription by circumscription. You have to win, so it makes like rural constituencies overrepresented. So that means that rural constituencies, which are usually either more conservative or sometimes even centrist, they will vote for Macron or the far right, and so that means that we lose out on a lot of these constituencies, and so we might have less seats than we're polling at right now. But we'll see. Hopefully, we can change that with a good ground game.
I know we're going to keep circling back to the election itself, but I want to talk about the left in general and this left bloc, because I think the story, especially internationally in a lot of the French elections, was the resilience of Macron, that he will have he'll be the first president in a little bit to have a second term, according to the polls. The rise of Zemmour and another far right figure, and in the increasing there's a word for it I'm forgetting, but the right wing shift in the media landscape, at least in France. And I think this story on the left, or whatever's happening on the left, is worth unpacking too, and why exactly this is the case, because it seems quite clear that there is now a left union, which there hasn't been before, and it's worth unpacking why exactly that could happen in now, and it couldn't have happened last year or even last month. There's two reasons I've seen, so I'll propose them to you, and then I'd like you to weigh in. The first would be that despite the 2017 being the death of the Socialist Party, they still had quite a few seats in the Legislative Assembly. I think more than the France Insoumis, or am I mistaken?
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, which doesn't seem to correspond, certainly in my non-French picture of where the balance, the direction these parties are headed in. So that there was at least some claim, even over the past 5 years, although I understand the seats have shifted, there's some claim that the Socialist Party could have some claim to the left. And the second would be Macron himself coming out of the Socialist Party. There's the very funny Macron political compass, where he has said I'm
I'm a
trying to do quick
socialist
math.
and I'm not a
30,
socialist.
36 different things that can be
Yeah.
placed anywhere. And in 2017, he could, maybe not convincingly, but at least somewhat pitch himself as a progressive candidate. And it seems to me that that's no longer the case. So maybe we can start with that second one. Why? Maybe this is an obvious answer, but why can Macron no longer pitch himself as a progressive? What was maybe the final straw for people?
There was a lot of different things. There was the Gilets jaunes movement. There was the 2019 retirement reforms that were, heavily protested. There was like a transport strike in December 2019. We had like all these social movements, and especially with the Black Lives Matter movement in 2020. We also saw, people criticizing police violence. We saw people criticizing the way that Macron's ministers were taking elements of language of the far right, demonizing even like university professors and academics and intellectuals, calling them like Islamo leftists and all this. So we talked about this on the previous episode, and y'all have already addressed a lot of these issues with other speakers as well, like Cole Stengler. And I think like a lot of um, a lot of like what Macron has been doing is just what a typical right wing president would do. And his past couple prime ministers have come from the Republican Party. For example, Edouard Philippe or Jean Castex. They come from the Republican Party. His new prime minister, Elisabeth Borne, she comes from the Socialist Party, but she immediately joined Macron in 2017, and she's like responsible for a lot of privatization of the national railways and of the airports in Paris. So I would say like she's basically proved herself to be right wing, and you also had him like deliberating between picking a woman from the Republican Party a couple of days before he picked Elisabeth Borne. So like all around, like Macron is just a right wing guy, right? As you said, like in 2017, he could have proven himself to be progressive just based on his like communication strategy or based on like some of his social values or um, some of that kind of posturing on cultural issues and stuff like that. But now it's just too obvious. So I would say like people really want to address like bread and butter issues like inflation, which is extremely high, over 5% inflation that Macron has not been able to address. He's been trying to like lower the price of gas and like lower the price of energy in general and subsidize some of that. Take people, um, help people with their budgets there. But unfortunately, he's probably gonna like end that, after as soon as he, wins electorally, and as soon as he can have some respite from that, he's just gonna stop these subsidies for energy. So I would say like we know like we need to address these bread and butter issues, economic issues, issues that touch like people's material basis. So uh like there is renewed interest in the left just because of like the platform that we have, right? Blocking prices, raising the minimum wage to 1,500 a month, right? Um, the retirement age at 60 instead of 65 as Macron has it, right? So we want to, I guess, like we want to implement those policies, and then also there's a renewed sense of optimism for the left because like what we've done and the accords that we've made are actually historic in a way, because like in about 2 weeks we've done what what y'all in Germany with the traffic light coalition have done in like multiple months, right? So I think it was like 8 months or something to create the coalition and to agree upon everything. So it's like um, it's also due to the score of Mélenchon in the presidential election, right? Because like that's how for their own survival, the Socialist Party needs to ally with us and needs to give up like major parts of what they thought about the EU and their platform, right? But you're right. It's difficult to accept these people into our coalition because they've been traitors for the last 5 years of uh, well, I guess they produced Macron, and then like even before that, in 2012 to 2017, the Hollande administration has been, proved itself to be anti-worker with the Loi El Khomri, for example, which spelled out the demise of the 35-hour work week in French labor law, and they actually had to repudiate that when they joined the NUPES coalition. So we'll see how the situation evolves, because like the PS promises all of this now. They make a lot of nice promises, but we'll see when they if they keep their promises while they're in office, right? Um, so I will say the new anti-capitalist party, the NPA, which is a far left, party with Trotskyist roots. It's very small, but they were present at the negotiations with La France Insoumise, and their demand was that the PS be excluded from the talks. So initially, in late April, Mathilde Panot, president of the France Insoumise group at the National Assembly, she said in the Sunday Journal that there would be no discussions with the PS. But unfortunately, 2 days later, Mélenchon announced that there would. So I feel kind of conflicted, because like, okay, well, they accepted to give up parts of their platform. They accepted things like that were favorable on to La France Insoumise, but we know these people are going to be traitors, right? So it is true that the LFE like backtracked on this, and so like um within 2 days we changed our position on whether or not we would negotiate with the PS, and so the anti-capitalist far left was like, okay, y'all are abandoning your values and etc. Um, and it's true that like the PS was offered 70 seats, right, which is 3 times more than their proportional score in the presidential elections. And the NPA, the anti-capitalists, they were offered 15 seats with no solid winnable like constituency. So it's like it was really unfavorable for this small activist party that has the best intentions, and a lot of people in La France Insoumise really support Philippe Poutou and some of these like far left figures of the NPA. But it's like the thing is, the PS is really implanted in rural circumscriptions, and some areas where barons of the PS have been implanted for a long time, right? So they have like entire constituencies under their grasp, and if they accept things that are like on a national level going our way, like if they accept our entire program on a national level, we are going to use their constituencies on a local level to be able to implement the policies that we want, right? So I think, I don't know, we'll really have to see like whether or not the PS betrays their promises to us, right? Because like, give them benefit of the doubt, but yeah, I don't know. Okay, I'll be honest with you. Like I'm kind of against this, and I just want to say like I'm not a spokesperson of La France Insoumise or l'Union Populaire, and I'm not a paid working employee, right? Because like I have friends who work for the movement, etc. So like my criticisms are like my personal criticisms, and they don't represent the views of the movement. But it's just like, I know that these people have a really, really, really high chance of betraying us if they get into parliament, right? And so I'm personally against it, but I'm doing like local activism for a guy in my constituency that is a founding member of the left party, and he's been with La France Insoumise for a long time. He's been with the movement for 10 years, and like we have like I feel strongly about my local guy who's representing the NUPES right now, but when it comes to the PS, me personally, I would probably be a little bit skeptical or hesitant to support the PS, right?
I'm happy you brought it up because it is complicated. I would probably agree with you just from a gut feeling about who you should trust and who you shouldn't. But I think, I don't know how they made the decision, but it is a fact to different degrees. But let's take Germany, for example. It is true that many workers continue to vote for the SPD rather than Die Linke, even if Die Linke might be closer to their values, and that represents a crucial block, right, to building any left bloc or left alliance. And I think you said the word gamble, but that's exactly what it is, right? It's a gamble that what was Anne Hidalgo again? 2%, 1.5%. That if you get like if there's ever a time that you can force whatever is left of the infrastructure of something like the Socialist Party into a further left bloc, I guess the time would be now.
And I would say on that point, I guess like a lot of people would make the comparison. A lot of people on the far left, especially like Trotskyists, or in France or in Europe in general, would say like, look at Syriza and look at especially like Podemos, because Podemos is now like the minor coalition partner with PSOE, the Spanish Socialist Party, right? So um, we are not in the same position as that, right? We're not in the same position as they are in Spain, and we're not in the same position as Die Linke would have been in a red-red-green coalition in Germany, because we made 22 like percent of the vote, and the PS here in France made less than 2%. So we like are able to draw on our legitimacy uh, with like a vast swathe of voters and say like, okay, you have to accept our rejection of the EU, treaties of austerity, and the constraining of our domestic policies. You have to reject certain neoliberal or social liberal policies that you wanted to have before. And so like we're forcing the hand of the PS in these negotiations, and it just really depends on like whether or not when they get to parliament they will still be with us. I guess we still have like about 300 to 350 seats slated for us, so we'll be like obviously the dominant force in the left in the parliament if we get all of the seats that we want. But like um, yeah, I guess just the comparison to Spain or Germany is a good one initially, and then like it's kind of inversed because we are the dominant partner in the relationship.
So I'd like to, maybe this is actually related to that last question, which is La France Insoumise seems to me to be one of the go-to examples of a digital party. Maybe not as much as, let's say, Five Star Movement, but in terms of a left-wing party, maybe more than, because the Corbyn movement was they had momentum, but it was inside the Labour Party and things like that. But La France Insoumise is one of these new party forms that obviously since 2017 is in France are the dominant parties, and this often comes with the caveat or the asterisk that is whatever their poll numbers show, that there's a certain, because it's based around a charismatic leader, because it's kind of media driven and outside of certain institutional roots, that this can be, I'm not sure the right word, more fragile, or it's certainly just newer, and things can change more quickly. So I'd like to just invite you to talk about that dynamic of La France Insoumise. How much is it a digital party? How much would you push back against that classification? And all of these, even the Parliament of the Popular Union, which you referred to, and this new left bloc, to what extent are those maybe grounding or institutionalizing La France Insoumise?
Yeah, so I think you're definitely right. Like that's exactly true. It is a digital party. We do a lot of our activism, using social media, but also through platforms like this app called Action Populaire. It's like basically a social network for the left that plugs people into different activist actions and opportunities that uh, that are in their neighborhood. Like you can go distribute some tracts and or go to a protest or go to a campaign meeting that's around you. And so like we use like digital tools to supplement our in on the ground in person activism. And I would say La France Insoumise is also like the best group on the left for in person activism as well, because like when you look at the PS, a lot of what they do is just they have their apparatchiks in their constituencies that have been there for like decades, and they kind of just sit there and keep on uh, keep on getting people to vote for them. I mean, like with La France Insoumise, we have to go, be on the ground, but we also supplement that with a lot of digital mobilization. So that's what it is like on the day to day, volunteer activist basis. But when it comes to like the national level with our spokespeople and our elected representatives, we have like 17 elected representatives, and Mélenchon has a very strong personality. He has like a hot temper. Sometimes is really grumpy, And yeah, it's true that when it comes to like mass communications and the media, it can be delicate, but it can also like allow us to have these viral moments where um, the left is actually looking fresh and new, and it's like we're not constrained to the urban middle class, or we're not constrained to um, typical union voters that have always voted for the left for decades. We can actually appeal to young voters with social media. We can actually appeal to people in the countryside that are not really linked up with public services, or not really linked up with major institutional organizations like NGOs, associative groups, or unions. And it's like we can reach people with new communication forms. And so I think that's why like it actually is good to supplement your on the ground activism with strong social media personalities, and with good spokespeople that can really play a role. So we also saw that with like in 2011 to 2014. That's how like Podemos kind of rose to power. They had like a bunch of young people mobilized on the ground in 2011, and then you had a a handful of really good communicators that were always appearing on TV to represent this anti-system vibe that really won over a lot of people who were following the media at the time. So I feel like um, yeah, I guess the problem with media-driven mobilization and charismatic leaders is that it becomes extremely dependent on their personality. So if they get demonized by the media, then you're kind of fucked. And then um, that's kind of what happened with Mélenchon, like in 2018 when he yelled at a police officer, right? So like we got that going on, but we also have like internal democracy really suffers, and so people will like criticize La France Insoumise to say like, okay, Mélenchon takes a lot of these decisions, and even like the party cadres or the elected representatives in the National Assembly, they make a lot of decisions without consulting the activist base. So we have like about like 20,000 people that were plugged into the election, doing like on the ground activism uh, during the 2022 election, right? So and then we had like 300,000 people that were inscribed online on our digital platform. We took a vote internally with like 200,000 members online to see what we would do when Macron and Le Pen were at the second round, right? So we decided, that we would mostly vote blank in the case of Macron versus Le Pen, right? But they didn't consult us on whether or not we wanted to do an alliance with the PS, for example, or whether or not we wanted to have a coalition with any other party. That basically came out of the decision making that came from the top, with Mélenchon and a lot of political cadres that are integrated in La France Insoumise, and they didn't really consult us. So I would say that's the one like downfall that you have of like non-democratic movements, or that you have of like movements that are really based on mass communication and charismatic personalities. Um, they make you feel like you're not really part of that decision making process. But I would say like it was still better to have that for the presidential elections. Like look at Macron and Le Pen, right? They got really high scores. Their entire like party apparatuses are like based, and their movement structures are based on their personality, based on that hierarchical decision making that works in the Fifth Republic, right? Because like in France, the presidency is so powerful they can like do a lot of things without needing to consult the legislative assembly, right? So Mélenchon being that charismatic figure that we need, that's why we had 22%. If we were in Germany where, for example, Die Linke is making 5% and they have like a bunch of factions that, kind of attack each other a lot, like we kind of see that, at least for the presidential elections, what we were doing was good, right? What we were doing was, Mélenchon didn't have like any major political scandals or whatever. We had never like had like fake uh, fake employees that were getting paid with public taxpayer money, right? So none of these scandals, fell onto us. And I would say like we got really lucky because Mélenchon is just a really good speaker. He has no scandals. He's just a little bit grumpy, and that's it. Like you can actually run a good campaign with a good candidate and a good platform, and that's what we had. We just now that it's coming time to do a legislative election, it's becoming more difficult to justify this, to centralize things around Mélenchon's personality, even if he's calling for people to vote for him as a prime minister, right? There's going to be a time where we need to open up the movement and say like, okay, what do we really want to achieve? What is our program now that the elections are done? How are we going to mobilize, and how are we going to um, build ourselves into an institution just like just like workers did in the 20th century, right? um, with workers unions and with mass mobilizations and etc. So like that's the conversation to be had after the election, I would say, because like it's very difficult to have those in a month's time when we're all hands on deck concentrating really hard to get our local candidates elected.
I think that's a good point because the digital party, insofar as it exists, is presented as kind of the end state of this depoliticization. But it's worth asking in what ways it can. Well, I don't know the right analogy, maybe a cycle or like a rebirth or something that will create, like you said, new institutional forms that come out of the previous cycle of change. And I think the best way to unpack that, at least in the time we have left right now, is to ask how you see La France Insoumise, NUPES, how they're relating to how they will relate to the extra parliamentary left in popular movements over the next 5 years. Macron's still president, and in the last term, we saw the yellow vests, we saw the anti-racist protests, massive strikes. Macron certainly, I'm sure, will, as you alluded to earlier, pick up where he left off and try to implement some of those, cuts and quote unquote reforms that will lead to massive strike movements. What role does Mélenchon, does the parliamentary left have to play in relation to those popular movements and radical movements?
It's in what you described. Like we just had like these movements in 2019, 2018 with the Gilets jaunes and the transport strike, and the movement against the retirement reforms. So like all of those prove that there's mass mobilizations, but it's going nowhere if we don't like govern. If the left does not govern, then the right and the neoliberal like centrists will just constantly make these laws again and again, and they'll just try to pass them. And this is what's happening with Macron being reelected. He's just going to do the retirement reforms again, even though he took a break from implementing them because of COVID, because he knew like it would be like extremely unpopular to do it at the same time as COVID happening, right? But like I think that one thing that we can expect is a lot of people out on the streets marching against retirement reforms because it's like extremely unpopular, moving the retirement age from 64 to 65, right? When what we are proposing is 60. And it was actually 60 a long time ago during the Front Populaire. In the 1930s, literally, we had like the retirement age at 60. It's crazy how we're just like going back, pushing it back to like 65 when, historically, isn't like technology and capitalism supposed to be progressing towards less and less work for for the general public, right? Like we're supposed to be having technological progress and sharing work between the unemployed and the employed working populace. So it's like it just doesn't make sense, and that's why you're going to have a lot of marches against these retirement reforms. And it's up to the new left coalition to say like we propose the retirement age at 60, right? We propose a concrete plan of governing, right? Because look at the Gilets jaunes movement. For 3 years, they protested a lot. And of course, there's thousands of people that had been, hurt by the police. Even like some people that, had really major like mutilations and really terrible stuff happen to them. Even people that died, I think we talked about this last time. Um, a woman who died in her apartment because she got like suffocated to death from police who threw a bomb, who threw a smoke bomb there. And so it's like we have like all these sacrifices, but what does it amount to? If the Gilets Jaunes movement is not able to create a plan of governance, then what purpose do social movements serve if they're not able to organize into a cohesive uh, movement that's not necessarily electoral, but a cohesive movement that can actually take things from the hands of the capitalists, right? Take the capital that belongs to us, right? So I think that's where our role comes in as the electoral left, right? We need to be listening to the social movements and implementing their policies, and it's actually what I guess we can, if we want, we can end on this, but like the Popular Front that was elected in 1936 was a coalition of the socialists, the communists, and a center left party called the Radicals. They they were the first real left wing force in power in, I think this was like the Third Republic, right? After Napoleon III took power in the late 18 1850s, right? So we have like this first time in French history that the left comes to power. And what happens? We have like social movements out in the streets saying this is not good enough. Unions saying we're going to go on a general strike. And it's fucking crazy, bro. Like you have like unions saying like this socialist communist government that we just elected is not good enough. We need even more, like we need them to keep their promises, and we're going to go out in the streets and protest for even more labor rights. And that's like what really changed the deal for France. Actually, that's why we implemented, something that was close to like I think it was like a 40-hour work week at the time, and it was like 8-hour days, and social benefits. The first time we had like vacations, all these things that the labor movement took from the hands of capitalists and even forced the socialists and the communists to accept, right? So it's really the people that are going to be at the forefront of change, and it's never the parliament that is actually going to make those emancipatory changes. It's like we need to have those social movements out in the street, and then we need to listen to them and implement their policies and just be at the service of the people, right? But I mean, like we'll see like the results, and it's going to be very difficult to get a legislative majority. So we'll see what happens.
There's a big focus on ecology in the platform, and the E stands for Ecologic. And I think you have you wrote a note to us about there's 5-year terms in France, and especially on this, it's almost like the opposite of an ecological timescale. Ironically, which is that if you're trying to do something about global warming, then there's a very short timescale that you have to act in, and 5 years is basically more than half the time to a lot of this, like 2030 and these deadline years. And I hope that urgency comes through for the party, for the movement, and for the left in general.
Yeah. I mean, I would say like if we don't win a majority in the legislature in France, the only alternative is not to wait for the next 5 years, to have another presidential election. It's actually to have a general strike at that point, right? Like that's literally the only alternative that will actually like force the hand of capital to, to give us, the social benefits that we need to address inflation, and to start to change the capitalist system, and to address like issues like ecology and ecological planning that we need, right? So it's going to be impossible to wait around 5 years, because like the IPCC says that we need to act in 3 years. So I mean, we know Macron is not going to do anything for the environment, and we know that the capitalists are not going to like just freely give up their money or freely give up the means of production. So we just got to like literally, if we don't win in a month, bro, like we got got to go on strike.
I can't add anything to that. On that note, Flo, thank you very much for joining us, for rousing our listeners, I hope. The elections are on June 12th and 19th for those who want to circle them on their calendar. Anything else to add?
Yeah, I just want to plug Berlin's international summer camp hosted by the international branch of Die Linke. So last year they held a host of conferences in June. It was really great. They had like activists from Kashmir, Western Sahara, Turkey, and all over Europe who gathered to share some experiences and deliver conferences and host workshops about how we can learn from each other's movements and build the left. So I would highly recommend that event. It's going on from June 25th to the 26th in Berlin. So you can check the event details or the Facebook event page. In the description, they'll be provided below. So, but yeah, thanks for having me on again. And anytime, just let me know. I'll love to suggest some speakers or whatever. When it comes to France and the electoral scene or like the activist scene in France. So, yeah.
I hope you'll be. We'll call you in live streaming from the streets when the general strike starts.
Yeah, yeah, bro. Why not? I mean, hopefully.
Wait, I want to ask you quickly. Are you? Will you be here in Berlin at the Die Linke Internationals?
Yeah. I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking. Maybe you can cut this out.
I shouldn't make any promises either, but I think I will be there too. I've never been actually. I haven't been able to go. So.
Oh, nice, awesome.
If you want to see both of us, maybe.
Yes.
Come on by. Flo, thanks again so much, and we will talk to you soon. Have a good one.
All right. Thanks, Rob.